Bit of a tight schedule, so we'll start on time. 9:10, that's right. Okay, Boker Tov, thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see everybody here and to be with you together for this special edition of our weekly learning program. We've called this day Chanukah Gvura B'Yamim Ha'emu B'Zman Hazeh. There's no greater time than Chanukah to talk about Gvura, to talk about bravery, strength, Jewish heroism throughout the ages, from the times of Chanukah to our very days as well. And Gvura, as we all know, has many, many different forms, many expressions we'll be hearing today from some very, very special people in terms of modern day Gvura as well. So just before we begin, I want to thank our generous sponsors for this morning, Sharon and Michael Cronenberg. All the shiurim today have been sponsored. Leilui Nishmat, Sharon's mother, Rabbanit Rivka Bat Harav Shimon Asher, and as well, Mazel Tov on the birth of a new grandson, Chaim Eliyahu ben Shimon Asher. So Mazel Tov and thank you, Shokoach, and Leilui Neshama. Okay, I've called the topic this morning. There is no handout for this shiur. The handout you have will be for the later ones, but this will be Torah Sheba'al Peh. I've called the shiur Total Victory, ? The miracle and the meaning of Chanukah. So I just wanted to be controversial, not really. But really what's behind the title is the following. You know, last year, if we cast our minds back a year ago to Chanukah, it was the first festival that we had, with the exception of Simchat Torah, of course. But it was the first festival that we had from the outbreak of this war. And there were many, many questions on people's minds. I think there are still many questions on people's minds. Last year, it was very clear and it was brought into sharp focus. You know, how do we celebrate with all that's happened back then? And again, you know, certain things people are still going through a lot, but back then a lot of things were still very, very fresh in our minds. How do we celebrate Chanukah? How can we be happy at a time like this? And these are questions which we've been asking ourselves throughout, really, I think every Chag throughout the cycle of the year, and as we're going again. If I told you last year on Chanukah that we're going to fast forward a year, it'll be Chanukah the next year, and we'll still be at war, I'm not sure you would have believed me. I'm not sure you would have known what to say. You know, how can it be? This is still going on. And there are many. It raises many other questions. You know, what are we achieving? What have we achieved? What's it all for? What's the point? What does victory look like? Okay, so I'm not going to go into a military analysis here. I'm not going to go into a geopolitical discourse. I'm not qualified to do that, and this is not the forum for that. But I want to address some of those questions from a Torah perspective, from an Emunah perspective. And I want to do it in the following way, because if you think back to Chanukah, you'll realize something. You'll realize we've been here before. All the questions that I mentioned at the beginning, at the outset, are not new questions, but they were the exact same questions that the Jewish people were asking themselves in the times of Chanukah and beyond. We have hindsight, which is 2020, right? We look back on Chanukah. If I ask, you know, what's Chanukah about? Is there a Chag? You'd say to me, what are you talking about? Of course, it's Chanukah, it's Halal, Toda'ah, it's Sufganiyot, it's Latkes, it's everything. They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. Right? That's the story. You've got the hindsight. We know that's what happened. But really, it was a lot more complex than that. And when you go back and you think, see, at the time, and I want to look at this from both a historical perspective and a halachic perspective, and we do a bit of a deep dive into what happened during the days of Chanukah and what happened afterwards, we see it's very, very, very far from straightforward. Very far from straightforward. There is a lot of controversy that surrounds Chanukah. There are a lot of questions that surround Chanukah. Should it be a Chag? Should we have a Chag? Is there anything to celebrate at all? It's not so clear. It's not so clear. And when we understand what those questions are, even if we don't have necessarily definitive answers to all of them, but we look at what the response was and what the response has been throughout the ages, I think that will help us understand and unpack what our response should be today. Okay, so let's begin as follows. Why do we celebrate Chanukah? What happened? What was the miracle for which we celebrate Chanukah? Okay, this is the question that the Gemara asks, the Gemara Masechet Shabbat. It says, Mai Chanukah, right? What is Chanukah? And over there, Rashi tells us, Mai Chanukah means over which nes, over which miracle are we celebrating? What are our options? What are the two miracles we have? On the one hand, okay, you can end the share. Yeah, you can all go home. Okay, we have the nes of the milchama, right? Much ink has been spilt on this. This is familiar. We have the nes of the milchama, the war against the Yevanim, against the Syrian Greek Empire, and we have the nes Pach HaShemen. We have a small. We found just a small amount of oil. which was enough for 1 day. It lit in the menorah for 8 days. Okay, that's in the Beit HaMikdash. That is familiar to all of us. Now, if we look at our two primary texts in terms of Chanukah, right, so Ala Nisim, which we will say throughout our tefillot, throughout our benching, throughout the days of Chanukah, it focuses on the war. The Nespach Hashemin is mentioned tangentially. It's not the big deal. But if you look at the Gemara, and I want to read to you how the Gemara defines what Chanukah is, what's amazing is that the war is barely even mentioned. It gets a side mention. And if you think about it, and we would ask, what is Chanukah all about? Why are we celebrating? We're celebrating because of the war. Remember, they tried to kill us, we survived. Let's see. Okay? But that was miraculous. But listen to what the Gemara says. So it says, My Chanukah, the Tanu Rabbanan, B'kafei b'Kislev, Yom Chanukah B'tinan. Okay, what is Chanukah from 25th of Kislev, Kafei Kislev? We have 8 days. What's special about these 8 days? You cannot give a hesped on them, and you cannot fast on them. Okay? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary and they defiled all the oils, when the Chashmonaim overcame them and were victorious, they looked around, they looked everywhere, they could only find one small vial of oil that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. Okay, it was only enough for 1 day. A miracle was done and it lit for 8 days. In a different year, they established these days as days of praise and thanksgiving. So 2 things I want to point out from this Gemara. Okay, there are many things that we could ask. Number 1 is, notice the mention of the war is so trivial, it's so tangential. It's like, yeah, okay, there was a war, we won. Okay, but that was not a big deal. There's no celebration here. There's nothing exceptional about it. It happened when the Greeks came in, when we won the war. Okay, when we won the war. This was the event. This was the miracle. But there's no mention of it. And the second thing is, when was Chanukah established? Not there and then. The Gemara says, L'shana acheret. A later year. Now again, the Rishonim, the Achronim discuss, why does it say L'shana Acheret? Many reasons are given. But we get a sense here already that there's something that wasn't so clear. Maybe there's a bit of controversy here. Maybe there's a bit of opposition. Maybe there's a bit of misunderstanding. There and then, we don't have a celebration. Maybe people were asking themselves, what, you're going to celebrate on this? This is victory. This is a war. This is a miracle. Okay, so already here we start to see between the lines that something's going on. It's not so clear and it's not so straightforward. And I think if we delve into the history, and again, we're not going to go into all the details now, but if you think about the history of the war and of what took place, we start to understand why. We start to understand why the mention of the war is so minor and is so trivial, because it didn't end there and then. It didn't end so well. Right? How long was, we think, I don't know about you, but the way I always thought about it growing up was that Chanukah, there was this war, it took place, we think, 6-day war, whatever, okay, we took on the mighty Greek army, it was miraculous, they started against us, they set the decrees, they fought against us, we fought back, okay, when did it end? When was the total victory? On Chanukah, we came into the Beit HaMikdash, we rededicated it, and then everything was over, right? Well, no, that's not the story at all. That's not what happened. Chanukah is maybe the wars between the Chashmonaim and the Yevanim were going on for years, going on for about a decade. Okay, Chanukah is the halfway point. We're still fighting these wars for at least another 4 years after Chanukah. So it's not the end, it's not victory, it's not even the ceasefire, maybe it's a temporary pause, but nothing more than that. Also, what happens to all the heroes of the Chanukah story? Matityahu had 5 sons. What happens to them? 4 out of 5 get killed. Yehuda Maccabi, the hero of the Chanukah story, he gets killed, not at Chanukah, a few years later, 4 years later, okay? And so too for all of his brothers, except for Shimon. So, we're used to thinking of it in these glowing terms, this miraculous, this glorious victory in the war. 4 out of the 5 brothers are killed at the hands of the enemy. Within a century after Chanukah takes place, the Roman Empire starts to rise, and we know how that ends. Okay, we know what happens to our sovereignty there. The whole story of the Chashmonaim, the whole family and the whole dynasty of the Chashmonaim is one of the most tragic stories in Judaism. These 5 brothers who start out fighting against Mil Hashem Elai, fighting against the Greeks, fighting against assimilation, fighting against the defilement of our culture. Ultimately, them and their descendants end up epitomizing all of that which they fought against. Chazal tell us, the Gemara in Bava Basra, today the Daf Yomi is finishing Bava Basra, right at the beginning of the Masechet, the Gemara tells us, if anybody comes to you and says, Animi bnei Chashmonai, that I am a descendant of the Chashmonaim, they're lying, they're a slave, because they were all wiped out. Because their descendants, why did this happen, by the way? So the Ramban points out that the Chashmonaim made a terrible, terrible mistake. They were Kohanim. They were from the tribe of Levi. And they took on the kingship for themselves. We have the pasuk in Vayechi. It says, "Lo yasul shevet miYehuda, mechokek ben raglav." The kingship comes from the tribe of Yehuda, not from the tribe of Levi. The Chashmonaim, after the Chanukah story and after the victory, they took on the kingship for themselves. Says the Ramban, they were punished. They were punished very, very terribly. As I said, four of the five brothers died. They're killed in the war. Later on, their children, their descendants, become kings, and they become some of the most wicked kings that we've ever had. There is, it seems, that we had a Kohen Gadol, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who likely was from this dynasty. He becomes a tzduki. He becomes a non-believer at the end of his life. Later on, you have a king, Alexander Yanai, who is also from this family. He ends up killing all the sages. We end up with Herod. Okay, it did not end well. It did not end well. And it didn't take very, very long for the whole story to deteriorate and to spiral out of control. So, if we're celebrating the military victory and we're celebrating what happened afterwards, this doesn't seem like something to celebrate. You have questions about the government nowadays. Back then it was far worse. Far worse. Again, I'm not getting political. I'm just talking about what was then. Okay? And something else. So that's the war itself. And that's the day after. Okay, it doesn't end well. But even after that, we find a fascinating discussion in the Gemara. Like I said, the Gemara there told us that Chanukah was what? They didn't establish it there and then. It was L'Shana Acheret. They had to wait and see. Okay, why did they have to wait and see? Maybe related to what we've been discussing. But there's another discussion. The Gemara Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Chet Amud Bet, has a discussion about whether Chanukah itself should have been abolished or not. We have, I'm not sure if you know, but we have many festivals that were in the Jewish calendar that were abolished after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, this is what's called Megillat Ta'anit. And the truth is the Gemara, the primary Gemara that talks about Chanukah, which I read out to you before, which is very, very strange, it's very cryptic. All you have to say about Chanukah is that it's a day you don't fast, and it's a day you don't give a hesped. So seemingly this is taken from this Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit, there were certain days, most of them were related to different events that occurred, or different miracles, or quasi-miracles that took place related to the Beit HaMikdash. And that's what's called Megillat Ta'anit. So these are the days you don't fast, you don't say hesped, right? You don't say Tachanun on these days. Okay, then it becomes it's a minor festival. You don't say Tachanun, it becomes a major festival. Okay, but that is Megillat Ta'anit. So the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says, nowadays, many of these events are no longer relevant, right? How can you celebrate things that happened in the Beit HaMikdash if you don't have a Beit HaMikdash? What do you, Ha'ikar chaser min ha-sefer, as they say. So the Gemara has a machloket Tanaim, machloket Amoraim, itma Rav v'Rabbi Chanina Amri, batla Megillat Ta'anit, Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, lo batla Megillat Ta'anit. Okay, there is a discussion. Do we say the days that were part of this Megillat Ta'anit, do we still celebrate them, or do we stop celebrating them? Now, one of the days that is included as part of Megillat Ta'anit is Chanukah. So the Gemara here has a discussion, and it says, just understand how controversial, understand how heated this got. Okay, there were those of the sages who said, we continue celebrating Megillat Ta'anit. We continue celebrating Chanukah. And there were those of the sages who said, no, we don't celebrate Chanukah anymore. We have to stop. So what happened? So it says the following case. This was brought in the Gemara, the Tosefta mentions as well. It says, Maseh, the Gazrut Ta'anit b'Chanukah belod. Okay, you have a machloket, you have an argument. One side says this way, one side says that way. What do? We have to create facts on the ground. You say we should celebrate Chanukah. You say we shouldn't celebrate Chanukah. We're going to declare a fast day on Chanukah. Then everybody will know there is no Chanukah, there is no festival, there is no celebration. It's a fast. So that's what they did in Lod, a few meters away from the airport. They set a fast. V'yarad Rabbi Eliezer v'rachatz, Rabbi Yoshua v'sipir. So Rabbi Eliezer said, no, it's not going to happen. So he went and he went to wash. right? In a way that is, these are things which you cannot do on a fast day. Rabbi Yoshua went and had a haircut to show everybody, no, there is no fast. We're still celebrating Chanukah. The fact that you declared a fast, you now have to fast over the fast that you made because that was improper, that was incorrect. So it goes on. So essentially, now, halacha l'maaseh, we assume, we understand probably that Megillat Tanit was cancelled. Or that's one of the opinions. The other days of Megillat Tanit are cancelled. But it says here, but why is it? Even according, the Gemara says, even according to the opinion that says Megillat Tanit was cancelled, why is Chanukah different? By the way, there's one other day that was in Megillat Tanit, which we still celebrate. That's Purim. So it says the Gemara of Yosef, Shani Chanukah de'ika mitzvah. Chanukah is different because Chanukah is not just about you don't have a hesped, you don't have a Tanit, but you have a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? Lighting the Chanukah candles. So Amar le'Abai v'tibatel ihi v'tibatel mitzvata. Says, okay, what's the big deal? You established the day, you established the mitzvah, you're now cancelling the day, and you cancel the mitzvah. Says the Gemara, no. Amar of Yosef, Shani Chanukah demifalseim nisa. Okay, pisumanes. Chanukah is different because we are publicizing the miracle. So what do we have here? Essentially, what the Gemara is telling us is that yes, Chanukah remains controversial. It remains controversial to the extent that there are those who say, forget about it, abolish it, there should be no more Chanukah. The only thing that saves it, so to speak, is the mitzvah, but not just the mitzvah, the fact that there is Pirsume Nisa. Okay, we'll talk in a moment, what is this Pirsume Nisa? What is so remarkable and what is so unique about publicizing the miracle? This also raises many questions, because the way that we publicize the miracle on Chanukah, I could think of far better ways to do it. But that's what it says. We keep Chanukah because of Pirsume Nisa. So essentially, what we're saying until this point now, if I can summarize what we've said and some of the questions that we've raised, because essentially we're asking the following. Chanukah is a day which commemorates a war, a miraculous victory that we had, and the victory ended and the war ended on Chanukah. That's what we thought before the shir began. And what we've now understood is the following. That it's not clear, number one, if this war was actually significant enough to celebrate anything. Right? The Gemara asks the question. I mean, it's ludicrous when you think about it. You have a war, you defeat an empire, or you have some oil that burned for a few days. You know, which is more significant? If I were to ask you which is more significant, you'd say, I'm out of my mind. What are you asking? The candle burns. Okay, the oil burned. They could have waited. They could have found more, whatever. If we'd lost the war, that's it. There would be no more Jewish people. So obviously the war is more significant. But no, we look in the sources and we look back and we see that the fact that we're even asking the question, the fact that in many of these sources the war is barely even mentioned, that already raises questions. Number two, the fact that at the time it was clearly controversial. Something was going on because it says L'shana acheret. It's only a year later, and that maybe they needed the perspective of hindsight, a certain perspective of hindsight, in order to celebrate it. Okay? And we saw the war goes on. We don't achieve total victory, certainly not immediately, maybe never. There are some very, very grim results that come out of the war itself. As I said, many of our leaders are killed. Okay? The day after the war does not work out very well either, to put it mildly, with the Hashmonaim and that whole story. And then years later, we even have a serious consideration, and maybe this is the reason why, to say, okay, what are we celebrating for? You know, we've got this Chanukah, we've got this, if you take Purim just as an example for a moment. So Purim also, we have a lot of similar issues, right? We talk about total victory. Again, Purim, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. They will drink as well. But we don't say, you all know we don't say Hallel on Purim. And one of the reasons the Gemara gives, it says we don't say Hallel on Purim because Akate Avdei Achashverosh Anan, because we're still enslaved, because we're still living in exile, we're still under this foreign subjugation, and things haven't really gotten that much better. Okay, so what are we celebrating? Okay, come back in a few months' time, we'll talk about why we celebrate Purim. But why are we celebrating Chanukah? It seems very, very, very strange. Okay, and the last thing that we said, the thing that's going to tie it all together, that's going to save it, the thing that saves Chanukah, is this idea, this element of pirsumanes, of publicizing the miracle. Now, when we start lighting our candles next week, so all of the halachot pertaining to Hadlakat Nerot Chanukah are related in one way or another to this idea of pirsumanes, of publicizing the miracle. When do we light our candles? We have to light our candles at the time when most people are going to see it. Where do we light our candles? We light them where most people will see it as well. Right? The only place aside from the home that we don't light candles is in the Beit Knesset, it's where people gather together, it's for Pirsum Hanes. But essentially the mitzvah is Narish Beito, it's that you light it at your home in order to publicize the miracle. And the question I ask you is this, right? If we want to publicize the miracle, if we really want everybody to see it, you know who knows how to do Pirsum Hanes? Chabad knows how to do Pirsum Hanes. Right? Everywhere you go, you walk around in this city and any other city, you walk around the streets, you have these big Chanukah, they're on the streets, they're outside. Anywhere and everywhere you go, there's a Chanukah in the town square, you light the candles. That's Pirsum Hanes. That's Pirsum Hanes. But most poskim don't accept the Shita of Chabad. That's why, if you are not a Chabadnik and you go to whatever public event, generally speaking, we don't light with a bracha unless it's in the shul. Okay, it's not a halachic shul. I'm not getting into the sugya now. If you want to hear more about it, come on Sunday morning. Then we'll discuss the halachot. But the point is, where do we light the candle? We light it outside our house or inside our house through the window. And we say, once you're lighting in the home, okay, so light it in the home, in the place where the most people will see it. Right? Light it in the window, light it outside where people can see. But my question is, surely if we really want to publicize this thing, don't light it in the home, light it in the town square. Light it on top of the buildings, right? Which we do, again, but we don't say a bracha, unless you're Chabad. So what's going on? And that pirsum, which is so minor and so trivial when you think about it, that's the thing that saves Chanukah. So I think, we can try and tie it all together, I think the answer here is twofold. And I think a deeper understanding of just what this Pirsum Hanes is, maybe not to whom we're publicizing, but what we're publicizing, will help us really understand what we're doing, help us understand Chanukah, maybe, hopefully, tie some of our questions together. So it goes like this. I'll share with you a piece from the Tzitz Eliezer. Tzitz Eliezer, who we quoted in our last couple of shiurim in a halachic context, also has within his response, he has many drashot that he talks about different chagim and different ideas. So he has a beautiful idea which he expresses. He says when we think about Chanukah, again, we think about what the war was, what was the battle between us and the Seleucid Empire. So ultimately it became a physical battle as well, but it was primarily a spiritual battle, at least when things began, right? The Yevanim said, okay, all you have to do is just be like us, just give into our culture and we won't kill you. Just assimilate, that's all we want. There have been other times in our history, today included, where they said that's not good enough. Right? We'll kill you, and it's a war of annihilation. There it was not. It became that, but it was not ultimately. This was a war of ideas. This was a spiritual war. And what was it that they fought against? So they fought against many things. There were many decrees, Limud Torah, Shabbat, Milah, etc. But one of the primary things is that they challenged the Jewish home. They challenged the sanctity of the Jewish home. Okay, and there are many expressions of this. I won't get into the details now, but this was a major part, this was a major catalyst in what led to this ultimately becoming a war. So the Tzitz Eliezer says like this, he says they came along to fight against Kedusha, to fight against holiness, to fight against sanctity of the Jewish home and of the Jewish family unit. So it's the most natural thing. So that's why, what is our victory? Our victory is that unit continues. That sanctity within the Jewish home continues, and that is what we are publicizing. The way you publicize that is outside the home because it's connected. It's the fact that there is a Jewish home and what's going on inside in that home, which is continuing that tradition and continuing the ideas, continuing the culture, continuing the Masoret of thousands of years. They tried to wipe that out, but we are able to continue that. That is the victory, that is the nes, and that is the pirsum. So he says like this. I'll read you the Tzitz Eliezer. This is in the Shut Chelek Yud Bet Siman Lamed Gimel, if you want the reference. He says, היוונים ב-100 ה-80 הבינו זאת, כי הצביון המשפחתי המיוחד של עם ישראל הוא סוד קיומו, ולכן הטילו את כובד משקלם לבטלו. They understood that sanctity, that unit, that Jewish home is a fortress. And they did everything they could to try and destroy that. He says, ultimately, אבל עמנו הבין, גם הוא שכמו שהגזרה זו כמתת נשמת האומה. If they're going to try decrees which are going to violate the sanctity in that way, so that's like a death sentence. ועמדו ולחמו, we fought against it, נגד גזרת זאת, יחד נגד יתר גזרות, against all the decrees together. And he says, כשגברו עליהם וניצחום וקבעו לזכר זה שבכל בית יהודי ידליקו נר חנוכה איש וביתו. That is why, says the Tzitz Eliezer, ultimately, the decree and the victory was that we'll light the candles where outside every home. That the former glory has been restored. של האיחוי והאיחוד התא המשפחתי הישראלי, of the renewal, of the coming back together, reuniting the Jewish home, the Jewish family unit. Right? This is a war of cultures, war of ideas, and this is a tremendous victory we have within that. I think we can expand this a little bit as well. As much as this was a battle and talking about the home on a micro level, in our days, we can definitely appreciate this, that this is a battle over the home on a macro level as well. Right? And if you think about today, you think about the war that we're fighting nowadays, of course there is a physical war as well. And again, as I said later on, we'll hear more about Gvura in that sense. But there's a war of ideas that's behind it. And it's a battle over the home. If you look at how our enemies, what do they call this? What do they call this war? Well, they call it Al-Aqsa flood. If you look at everything that they have to say and everything they say, where are they fighting? It doesn't matter where they shoot the rockets. They say, we're fighting over Jerusalem. Right? Thankfully, seem to have less rockets here than in other places, but it's a fight. It's over the home. It's over the home and what the home represents. By the way, this whole idea of Pirsum Nisa, that is what we're publicizing. We find it one other place in Halakha, and we find there it's also connected to the home. It's inside the home. That is by Pesach. By Pesach, Balela said that there are halachot. You look at the Rambam, you'll see that there are halachot that are related to publicizing the miracle when it comes to the 4 cups of wine. And again, we ask the question, what kind of a pirsum is this? You're inside your home. Nobody can see you. Nobody else is there. No. The fact that we're in the home, that we have the home, that is the pirsum. That is the nest. That's what we are publicizing. So that is one element to this. And that victory endures. That victory began then, and no matter what else happens outside, that endures. But that is maybe from lamata lamala, right? That is from us. But there's a second aspect to this, which is from lamala lamata, which is Hashem reaching out to us. Not necessarily what we do for Him, but what He does for us. And now we see this in Chanukah, this very well. And I think this answers our questions in another way, as follows. Many of the halachot of Chanukah are unique. Very, very different to any other chag. For example, the fact that Chanukah is the only chag where the only mitzvah we have is at night. It's not during the day. It's in the depths of winter. It is the only chag that we have that is not normally. It's in the middle of the month. It's at the end of the month where you cannot see the moon, when it's dark. We have this festival that's in the middle, in the coldest time of the year, in the darkest time of the year, the darkest time of the day. The Chanukah itself, we light very, very close to the ground. Everything represents, and then you have this little candle, again, this little candle of Pirsum Hanes. How much light is going to come from this candle? But that is exactly what Chanukah comes to represent and comes to teach us, that even and we've seen historically, we now understand a little bit more, that Chanukah occurred in one of the darkest times in Jewish history, and even after the miracle, it was still a very, very dark time. It was still a very dark time, but in that time, why was having that light, why was having that oil so special? Because ultimately we said it's not such a great miracle. We didn't need it. God didn't have to do that for us, so to speak. But it was a sign. It was sort of a kiss from above. It was God saying that no matter how difficult things seem, no matter how dark things seem, no matter you seem completely alone and isolated and things are bad and things are going to get worse and things seem very, very bleak. But even with that, I am here and I am with you. And you have that light that lights up the darkness again and shows us that no matter what is going on outside, no matter what winds are blowing, here we have a fortress. And it's a fortress because we're not by ourselves, because Hashem is with us. The Rambam writes something amazing when he talks about Ilchot Chanukah. He says the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, he defines it as chaviva ad me'od. He says this is an exceedingly precious mitzvah. The Rambam doesn't do that by other mitzvot. All the mitzvot are precious. The Rambam doesn't tell us Shabbat is a precious mitzvah. Tefillin is a precious mitzvah. Pesach is a precious mitzvah. He tells us that Chanukah is a mitzvah chaviva ad me'od. What does that mean? Maybe what it means is this. It means that Chanukah as a mitzvah is a time that shows us, that Hashem demonstrates to us that we are chavivim ad me'od, how precious we are to Him. And that's what the light represents. That's what it's all about. That's the pirsum. And I want to just share with you, I know we're running out of time, but I want to share with you a piece that I saw last year. This was written by Ofra Laks. Ofra Laks is a journalist. I think her son, Naveh, was killed in Be'eri on Simchat Torah last year. And she writes this piece, this is a few months after her son has fallen, coming up to Chanukah last year. She writes the following. She says, Chanukah, what a holiday. A holiday of light and miracles, a family holiday, a time for prayer for our children, their education. A holiday that at its peak, when the menorah is full and overflowing, brings my birthday. A holiday that lands in the middle of winter and warms the heart. But the truth is this year I'm a little afraid. The times when the whole family gathers highlight its missing parts. One child who no longer needs prayers. He's already in a world that is entirely good. And last year's Chanukah is still so present with memories of our Naveh. How can a person light a candle and push away the darkness if they feel they have no light from which to ignite it? That there is no light within them. Halakha says there is no such thing. It simply doesn't exist. Even a poor person who lives on charity must borrow or sell their clothing to obtain oil for lighting. Every person has some energy, some strength, some small spark within them from which they can light the Chanukah candles. Even if they are now empty of strength, and once that light is lit, it will push away a piece of the darkness and the surroundings will be brighter, and the next day it will increase and grow. There are many people around us who may need to borrow a candle or a wick this year to engage with light and talk about miracles. If we search within and don't give up on ourselves, we will surely find something from which we can begin. May we merit many lights of miracles, of togetherness, and of victory. Those are the words of Ofra Lax. And that, I think, is the message for us of Chanukah. You see, all the problems and all the difficulties and all the trauma that continued in the time of Chanukah, that was not an exception, but that is part of, that's characteristic of what the festival is about and of what it teaches us. And we can see that even within that time and even with those difficulties, we have those lights and we can see those lights in the darkness. Those lights that remind us that we are not alone. Those lights that remind us that, yes, no matter what winds are blowing outside, we have a fortress within, and within ourselves, we have somebody who is looking out for us and is together with us. That is total victory.